Once again, Christian greetings to all our valued listeners and viewers throughout the whole world. More particularly to all Shepherd's Rod believers, and most especially to our beloved brothers and sisters in the United States of America. Special greetings to our brethren in Colorado, to our brethren in Georgia, in Fiji Island, Mexico, Spain, in Africa, to the United Kingdom, and also to our brethren in Australia, and to the rest of the 144,000 living saints scattered abroad. Greetings. May the good Lord bless you, brothers and sisters. This is our episode number 3 on the subject, current events that may fulfill the prophecy. And I would like to read 2SR on page 100. Let's read 63. 2SR page 163. It says here, we quote from the writings of the Spirit of Prophecy. This was the time of Jacob's trouble. Then all the saints cried out with anguish of spirit and were delivered by the voice of God. The 144,000 triumphed. Their faces were lighted up with the glory of God. Life Sketches, page 117. Note that the 144,000 in number were present in the time of Jacob's trouble. According to the following quotation, that time of trouble commences immediately after the close of provision, when Christ shall cease his work as mediator in man's behalf. Then this time of trouble will begin. Patriarchs and Prophets, page 201. That time of trouble is before any of the sleeping saints are resurrected. Therefore, the 144,000 are not resurrected, but are living saints who have never tasted death and are to be translated at the second coming of Christ. 2SR page 163. Now let us read Patriarchs and Prophets. Patriarchs and Prophets, page 201, as stated in 2SR page 163. So it says, when Christ shall cease his work as mediator in man's behalf, then this time of trouble will begin. Then the case of every soul will have been decided, and there will be no atoning blood to cleanse from sin. When Jesus leaves his position as man's intercessor before God, the solemn announcement is made. He that is unjust, let him be unjust still, and he which is filthy, let him be filthy still, and he that is righteous, let him be righteous still, and he that is holy, let him be holy still. Revelation 22 verse 11. Then the restraining Spirit of God is withdrawn from the earth. As Jacob was threatened with death by his angry brother, so the people of God will be in peril from the wicked who are seeking to destroy them. And as the patriarch resolved all night for deliverance from the hand of Esau, so the righteous will cry to God day and night for deliverance from the enemies that surround them. Patriarchs and Prophets, page 201. Now, let us analyze closely that predicted event. The Jacob's trouble, by which God's people, the 144,000 living saints, is crying day and night for deliverance. Now, I would like to read the old symbolic code. Let's read the old symbolic code. To symbolic code number 12, page 8. To symbolic code number 12, page 8. It says, why should they cry if there is no one to listen? Question number 141. The word to the lethal flock, page 12, places in post-probationary time the day and night cry of the saints, represented by the angel's cry to Jesus in Revelation 14, verse 14 and 15, thus making the saints to cry day and night in a time when they were in the sight of a holy God without an intercessor. Speaking of this time, early writings, page 280 and 281 says, the last tear for sinners had been shed, the last agonizing prayer offered. And let us read early writings itself. to have more better understanding, let us read the quotation itself from early writings. (280) and 281. So here the quotation had been taken from to Symbolic Code number 12, page 8. Now, I would like to read. If you could be able to read the entire pages, you can do it. But let us select only portion to minimize time. It says here in 280, every case had been decided for life or death. While Jesus had been ministering in the sanctuary, the judgment had been going on for the righteous dead and then for the righteous living. Christ had received his kingdom, having made the atonement for his people and blotted out their sins. The subjects of the kingdom were made up. The marriage of the Lamb was consummated, and the kingdom and the greatness of the kingdom under the whole heaven was given to Jesus and the heirs of salvation, and Jesus was to reign as King of kings and Lord of lords. Now, it says, as Jesus moved out of the most holy place, I heard the tinkling of the bells upon his garment, and as he left, a cloud of darkness covered the inhabitants of the earth. There was then no mediator between guilty men and an offended God. While Jesus had been standing between God and guilty men, a restraint was upon the people. But when he stepped out from between men and the Father, the restraint was removed. And Satan had entire control of the finally impenitent. It was impossible for the plagues to be poured out while Jesus officiated in the sanctuary. But as his work there is finished and his intercession closes, there is nothing to stay the wrath of God, and it breaks with fury upon the shelterless head of the guilty sinner, was lighted salvation and hated reproof. In that fearful time after the close of Jesus' mediation, the saints were living in the sight of a holy God without an intercessor. Every case was decided, every jewel numbered. Jesus started a moment in the outer apartment of the heavenly sanctuary, and the sins which had been confessed while he was in the most holy place were placed upon Satan, the originator of sin, who must suffer their punishment. Then I would like to go to the middle part. It says, the last tear for sinners had been shed, the last agonizing prayer offered, the last burden borne, the last warning given. The sweet voice of mercy was no more to invite them. Now, let us study early writings 280 and 281. in the light of the shepherd's rod. Because this vision is a continual vision that was given by God to Sister White, but the fulfillment cannot be construed as it is arranged in its proper order. But we need to analyze those statements in the light of the shepherd's rod. Now first, we need to ever remember that according to track number 3 on page 18, it says, let's read the statement. And as an intercessor, Daniel 7:13, pleading for sinful human beings, his mediatorial work began first in the holy, then in the most holy. Or in other words, let us distinctly separate Christ's mediation in the holy place and Christ's mediation in the most holy place. So what mediatorial work that was already finished at the time when Jesus Christ descended from heaven to deliver the 144,000 living saints. There is no such predicted event, brothers and sisters, that the constituent of the great multitude are crying day and night for deliverance. Such predicted event is directed only, particularly, to the 144,000 living saints. For they were the Jacobites. And that is the reason it is called the Jacob's Trouble. Now let us read to symbolic code number 12, page 8. It says, there seems to be a contradiction between the word to the little flock and early writings. So, the words to the little flock quoted on page 12, by which the saints are crying day and night for deliverance. Let us read words to the little flock, page 12. Then Jesus will have the sharp sickle in his hand, Revelation 14, verse 14. And then the saints will cry day and night to Jesus on the cloud to trust in his sharp sickle and reap. This will be the time of Jacob's trouble, out of which the saints will be delivered by the voice of God. Words to the little flock, page 12. So, our main objective now is to arrange those future events on its proper order. Now, first of all, concerning Revelation 14, verse 14, in track number 3, it says, on page 48, Revelation 14, verse 14 to 16. It says here, this coming of the Son of Man is plainly, therefore, not when the resurrected and the living righteous are caught up together to meet him in the air. For verses 17 to 20, following the ones quoted in the paragraph above, reveal that after he came and reaped the earth, another angel having a sharp sickle came and reaped a second harvest. Before the wrath of God, the 7 last plagues, Revelation 15 verse 1, was poured out upon the wicked. Thus again, and for the 4th time, it is seen that there are 2 different comings of the Son of Man. The one to sever the wicked from among the just in the church, Matthew 13 verse 49. And then immediately to call the just from among the wicked in Babylon, Revelation 18 verse 4. The other to take the saints, both the resurrected and the living, to the mansions which he has prepared for them. 1 Thessalonians 4:16, John 14 verse 1 to 3. But let us focus first to the coming mentioned in Revelation 14 verse 14 to 16. And this coming, according to this reading, in track number 3, page 48, must be fulfilled prior to the time of the second harvest, the second fruits, the great multitude. And that coming of Jesus Christ is to harvest the 144,000 living saints. Now, I would like to read 2TG 44 on page 37. It says, who gathers the first fruits? If the first fruits gather the second fruits, let us find our answer by reading Revelation 14 to 19. We'll no longer read because we quoted it several times. Then it says, here we are again told that there are 2 reapings, one by the Son of Man and another by an angel. The reaping by the Son of Man precedes the reaping by the angel. The Son of Man therefore gathers the first fruits. 2TG 44, page 37. The Son of Man therefore gathers the first fruits. So that is very plain. So that coming of Jesus Christ in Revelation 14 verse 14 to 19, or Revelation 14 to 14 and 15, is to harvest the first fruits to gather the 144,000 living saints. Now, going back again to the words to the little flock on page 12, it says, I would like to read. Words to the little flock on page 12. It says, the Lord has shown me in vision that Jesus rose up and shut the door, then entered to the Holy of Holies at the 7th month, 1844. But Michael standing up, Daniel 12 verse 1, to deliver his people is in the future. So, our subject must be pointing to Daniel 12 verse 1, which is very important because it is closely connected to Daniel 11 verse 45. Right? Let us read the statement in Daniel 12 verse 1. And at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince which standeth for the children of thy people, and there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time, and at that time thy people shall be delivered, everyone that shall be found written in the book. Daniel 12 verse 1. Now, the shepherd's rod declared clearly in tract number, I would like to read. Tract number 3 on page 50, on page 51. It says, as the cleansing of the heavenly sanctuary is a work of cleansing the books by blotting from them the names of both the backsliders and the tails, and as at the time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation, the only ones who shall be delivered are those whose names are found written in the book. The cleansing of the books, therefore, obviously takes place before the resurrection and before the time of trouble such as never was. Thus the unfaithful dead will be left in their graves at the first resurrection, and the unfaithful living will be left without deliverance from the coming trouble. But were their names allowed to remain in the books, then according to the records, either the wicked dead would have to be resurrected with the righteous, and the living wicked delivered with the living righteous, or else both the righteous dead and righteous living would have to be forsaken with them, alternatives both of which, of course, are impossible. And the quotation is, it says, thus again making mandatory an absolute separation as instanced in type in Joshua's time. That is the destruction of all Acans. Track number 3, page 50 and 51. So, that statement is very plain. That before the trouble begins, the cleansing of the sanctuary must be completely finished first. Because if there are still names of the wicked remain in the Lamb's Book of Life, at the commencement of the trouble, then God will be obliged to deliver the wicked, because God cannot deny Himself. He is the one who declared it in Daniel 12 verse 1 that at that time, what time? The commencement of trouble, any names found written in the Lamb's Book of Life will be delivered. That is the assurance given by the Almighty God. That at the very commencement of that trouble, all names found written in the Lamb's Book of Life will be delivered. And that is why the Shepherd's Rod says in track number 3, page 50 and 51, that statement in Daniel 12 verse 1 plainly indicating that prior to the commencement of the trouble, the Lamb's Book of Life will be completely cleansed first. That must be blotted out prior to that predicted event, because if their names will be allowed to remain or to retain in the Lamb's Book of Life to the very time when the trouble begins, then God would be obliged to deliver them, because He cannot deny Himself. God already declared any names found written in the Lamb's Book of Life at that time, Daniel 12 verse 1, the time by which the trouble begins, will be delivered. And in this study, there are 3 troubles that the Bible, the Spur Prophecy and the Shepherd's Rod publications predicts. First, the Great Tribulation. Let us distinctly separate the Great Tribulation in Matthew 24 and the Great Tribulation in Revelation 7 verse 14. There is similarity. Both of them are called Great Tribulation, but different events. The Great Tribulation in Matthew 24 verse 21, occurred in the Dark Ages. Which is the 1,260 years. And the mere fact that Revelation 11 verse 2 and verse 3, let us read the book of Revelation. But I would like to continue first this reading in 2 Symbolic Code number 12, page 8. To repeat again, brothers and sisters, the proper order of events is that first, Great Tribulation; second, little time of trouble; third, Jacob's trouble; and fourth, the great time of trouble. So I would like to repeat again. The Great Tribulation, Revelation 7:14. The little time of trouble. During the little time of trouble, the 144,000 living saints were not as yet been delivered. Although in the shepherd's rod, I think B.T. Hotep used the term short time of trouble rather than little time of trouble. Sister White used the term little time, but B.T. Hotep used the term short time. Now I would like to read 2SR page 110. And to minimize time, I would like to read the last portion on the second paragraph. When God's people are restrained from buying and selling, 2SR 110. When God's people are restrained from buying and selling, their only source of sustenance will be through divine providence, one way or another for that short time. So the shepherd's rod called it short time of trouble. God will provide and care for His people, but it may be in a similar circumstance as in the wilderness journey. Then it says, the time is not far distant when, like the early disciples, we shall be forced to seek a refuge in desolate and solitary places. As the siege of Jerusalem by the Roman armies was the signal for flight to the Judean Christians, so the assumption of power on the part of our nation in the decree enforcing the papal Sabbath will be a warning to us. It will then be time to leave the large cities, preparatory to leaving the smaller ones for retired homes in secluded places among the mountains. Testimonies for the Church, volume 5, 464, 465. So the comparison is like the early disciples, and that is pointing to the warning given by Jesus Christ in Luke 21 verse 20, 21 to 24, when ye shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies. Therefore, it seems that that event is typological. Not only typological, but in Bible commentary is very plain. I would like to read to you. 5 BC 11:23. Let's read. 5 BC 11:23. Luke 21 verse 20. Since to be repeated. After speaking of the end of the world, Jesus comes back to Jerusalem. The city then sitting in pride and arrogance and saying, I sit a queen, and shall see no sorrow. As his prophetic eyes rested upon Jerusalem, he sees that as she was given up to destruction, the world will be given up to its doom. The sins that transpired at the destruction of Jerusalem will be repeated at the great and terrible day of the Lord, but in a more fearful manner. So that is very plain in that statement in 5 BC 11:23 that Luke 21 verse 20 will be repeated again. Therefore, that is the type, and we have the antitype. Now, in the type, brothers and sisters, that is the time when the Jews were assembled together in Jerusalem to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. I would like to read the Great Controversy on page 30. It says, at the time of the siege, the Great Controversy, page 30. At the time of the siege, the Jews were assembled at Jerusalem to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. And thus the Christians throughout the land were able to make their escape unmolested. Without delay, they fled to a place of safety, the city of Pelia, in the land of Perea, beyond Jordan. The Great Controversy, page 30. And look at this statement in track number 3. It says here, track number 3 on page 82. Track number 3 on page 82, it says, plainly therefore, since the first and the second fruits of the literal harvest and its attendant rites foreshadowed a spiritual harvest of first and second fruits, they are to be climaxed by the antitypical Feast of Tabernacles. I saw the saints, says the servant of the Lord, in describing this celebration, leaving the cities and villages and associating together in companies and living in the most solitary places. Angels provided them food and water, while the wicked were suffering from hunger and tears. Early Writings, page 282. the wicked mentioned here are the wicked recorded in Isaiah 65. Isaiah 65 on verse 13. Beginning from verse 11, 12 to 13. But ye are they that forsake the Lord, that forget my holy mountain, that prepare a table for that troop, and that furnace the drink offering unto that number. Therefore will I number you to the sword, and ye shall all bow down to the slaughter. Because when I called, ye did not answer. When I spake, ye did not hear, but did evil before mine eyes, and did choose that wherein I delighted not. Therefore thus said the Lord God, Behold, my servant shall eat, but ye shall be hungry. Behold, my servant shall drink, but ye shall be thirsty. Behold, my servant shall rejoice, but ye shall be ashamed. And there must be separate study concerning Isaiah 65 verse 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15. But I only connect this verse to that statement in tract number 3, page 82, quoted in early writings, page 282. And for sure, brethren, the statement, when I spake, ye did not hear, that is the time when God the Father is speaking. They were not listening. They pay little attention to the message. The fulfillment of Isaiah 62 verses 1 to 3. Now let us go back to our main subject. We need to study closely the commencement of that evil time mentioned in Isaiah 57:1. Let's read Isaiah 57 verse 1. So let's read Isaiah 57 on verse 1. The righteous perisheth, and no man layeth it to heart. And merciful men are taken away, none considering that the righteous is taken away from the evil to come. So, the constituent of the altar, which is the sixth seal, the last seal, to those who are destined for grave and resurrection, the sixth seal are divided into two. Isaiah 57:1 and Revelation 14:13. Isaiah 57:1, they are those who died prior to the evil time. Whereas Revelation 14:13, they are those who will die in the period of the evil time. And that evil time is the Great Tribulation. That is the time by which the 144,000 were already completely sealed. Or in other words, the blowing of the four winds commenced during the Great Tribulation, and then it will continue respite to the end. And according to the shepherd's rod, that the cleansing of the books in the heavenly sanctuary must be accomplished prior to the time of the trouble. And we already divided the trouble into 4 divisions. Great Tribulation, short time of trouble, Jacob's trouble, and the great time of trouble. Now let us go back again to track number 5, page 110. And remember, it is attached to Revelation 11 verse 2. And hoping that we could be able to understand completely Revelation 11 verse 1, 2, and 3. Now I would like to read track number 5, 110. Reading on the middle part to minimize time. The court, in other words, is symbolical of the immeasurable, innumerable harvest of second fruits brought in after the measurable, numerable harvest of first fruits, the 144,000. It is not measured, meaning investigated, because it represents those among whom there are no bed to be cast out, for they are gathered in after the cleansing of the heavenly temple, Daniel 8 verse 14, after the judgment of the dead. Now, there are 3 after mentioned here. After the separation of the bad from among the good in the church, as illustrated by the parable of the net. Track number 5, 110. The word after meaning after the cleansing of the heavenly temple, meaning when the gathering of the second fruits begins. The cleansing of the books in the heavenly sanctuary is already finished, because it says they will be gathered in after the cleansing of the heavenly temple. Then second, after the judgment of the dead. So these 2 things is very important. Now, I would like to make a simple illustration. So, I would like to make a division here. So, this period of time, the gathering of the second fruits. Of course, that is the great multitude, right? Great multitude. Revelation 7 verse 9. When does the gathering of the second fruits, the great multitude of Revelation 7:9, what is the statement in track number 5, 110? After. After what? First, after the cleansing of the heavenly temple. Cleansing of the heavenly temple. Second, or number 1. Number 2, after the judgment of the dead. The judgment of the dead. That is very plain. Although number 3 says, after the separation of the bad from among the good. There are 3 events mentioned after. The great multitude, the gathering of the second fruits, will begins after the cleansing of the heavenly temple, after the judgment of the dead, after the separation of the bad from among the good. Or in other words, when the message is proclaimed to the second fruits, the great multitude, the ingathering of the second fruits commence. The cleansing of the sanctuary is finished. The proceedings of the judgment of the dead is finished. The separation of the bad from among the good is finished. Therefore, they are gathered in after the cleansing of the heavenly temple, after the judgment of the dead, after the separation of the bad from among the good. Now, when does the proclamation of the loud cry commence to the second fruits, which is the great multitude? Now, let us read to SR. Since there are only 2 fruits of the translated saints, the first fruits, the 144,000, and then the second fruits. To SR 173, it says, "Blessed are the dead which die in the Lord from henceforth, yea, saith the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors, and their works do follow them." Revelation 14 verse 13. which die from henceforth, that is, from the commencement of the loud cry. What does it mean by the word from henceforth? Let us read 1 SR 219. It says, Blessed, 1 SR 219, and I heard a voice from heaven saying unto me, Write, blessed are the dead which die in the Lord from henceforth. Note that after the sealing of the 144,000, there would be some who would die in the Lord, meaning saved. For the scriptures reads, from henceforth, meaning from the time this company was sealed. So the statement, this company was sealed, can be easily understood after the 144,000 were sealed as a body, because company. Because the sealing of the 144,000 living saints is divided into two sections. First, sealing as individual, then sealed as a body. And according to the shepherd's rod, they will be sealed as a body after all the Acans will be removed from among them. So we need to study closely, who are they, the Acans? There are a lot of subjects to study, brothers and sisters. Now, our main objective at this time is to find the definite time of that predicted event, Great Tribulation. The difference between the time of trouble and the Great Tribulation is that in the time of trouble, there will be no more saint to die. The only saints that remain at the commencement of the time of trouble are living saints. All the saints destined for grave and resurrection, they had been laid down to sleep according to the quotation in 2 SR 173 before the fiery ordeal of the time of trouble. Now let's read 2 SR 173. It says, which die from henceforth. What does it mean from henceforth in 1 SR 219? From the time when the 144,000 living saints were sealed as a body, after the company of the 144,000 was sealed as a body, from that time, then begin the fulfillment of Revelation 14:13, by which the last constituent of the sixth seal will be laid down to sleep prior to the commencement of the fiery ordeal of the time of trouble, according to this reading. But this is already the commencement of the loud cry to the great multitude, which no man could number. Now remember, we already read in track number 5, page 110 and 111, that the great multitude, the second fruits, will be gathered in, or will be gathered in the church after the cleansing of the heavenly temple. after the judgment of the dead. Now, I would like now to illustrate. So, for example, this is the commencement of the Great Tribulation, by which there are still saints to die. Revelation 14:13. When would that event will be fulfilled? After the cleansing of the heavenly temple, after the judgment of the dead. Therefore, the entire proceedings that pertains to the dead is completely finished before the commencement of the Great Tribulation. After the judgment of the dead, that is very plain. Track number 5, 110 and 111. The entire proceedings of the judgment that pertains to the dead is finished before the commencement of the Great Tribulation. That is the loud cry to the constituent of the great multitude, but the first increment. Who are they? The undefiled ones. Let us distinctly separate the constituent of the great multitude, which is the defiled ones, and the constituent of the great multitude, which is the undefiled ones. Now, let us read. Track number 9. Track number 9 on page 56. To gather a class defiled with women as second fruits. This class of saints must be those who have at one time been married to some unchristian mistress, a heathen church, and who consequently are not descendants of either Jacob or the Christian church. So there are to be two harvests, one from the church and one from the world. The record of the former mentions only Israelites, the 144,000, those not defiled with women, though it does not say that there may not be others, while the record of the latter, however, definitely embraces a great multitude from all nations, which must necessarily be both of undefiled and defiled ones, Jews and Gentiles. Undoubtedly, the undefiled ones must be the Jews. But that is Christian Jew. Brothers and sisters. Or Sabbath keepers. Here's another statement in track number 3. Page 72. It says, and the second gives the second fruits. The great multitude from all nations, some of whom also may be undefiled with women, heathen churches. And that is pointing to the 12 tribes. Now let us read 2TG. Let me read to you this reading. 2TG 43, page 24. Two TG 43, page 24. It says here, and they must be the undefiled ones among the great multitude. 2TG 43, page 24. Here you see that not only will God cleanse His church, Judah and Israel. So it points out to the spiritual Israel under the banner of the third angel's message. They are the first one to be cleansed. 2TG 43:24. Here you see that not only will God cleanse His church, Judah and Israel, by taking away all those who pollute His house of prayer, but that afterwards He will gather into His purified church. So that is the spiritual Israel, the purified church. But that afterwards He will gather into His purified church all the dispersed who have descended from both the kingdom of Israel, the 10 tribes, and the kingdom of Judah, the 2 tribes, all who are now out among the nations, not in the church of the Laodiceans. He will make them one nation over which it says, what is the statement? Prior to the millennium shall rule antitypical David their king. And that's what it means by the statement in track number 8, saying, better understand, track number 8, page 12, better understand God's plan for the ingathering of the 12 tribes of Israel and for reuniting them in one great kingdom. In 2TG number 4, page 14, it says, here we are plainly told that the 2 ancient kingdoms, the types. So let us distinctly separate the 12 tribes, ancient kingdom, the literal Israel, 144,000 living saints, the type, and the 144,000 living saints, the antitype. It says, here we are plainly told that the 2 ancient kingdoms, the types, He is to restore and join and so bring out the antitype. The 144,000 living saints, spiritual Israel, they are those who will left Egypt, but the 144,000 living saints, literal Israel, the type, they will be the one who will left Babylon. Because there are 2 Exodus. The first Exodus is in the day of Moses. The second Exodus is in the days of Zerubbabel. And we know that the shepherd's rod is very plain. In 1TG number 11, on page 3, it says, in our last Sabbath study, we learned that the prophecy of Zechariah is applicable to 2 peoples at 2 different times. First, to the Jews while they were returning from Babylon to Jerusalem. And second, to those who in the time of the end are to come out of all nations. Revelation 7 verse 9, Revelation 18 verse 4. We also learned that the revival and reformation which took place in Zechariah's day is a type of a revival and reformation that is to take place in our day. And that the peoples returning anciently from Babylon is a type of the people returning in the latter day Babylon. Revelation 18 verse 4. But it points out to the 12 tribes, which is the type. And to repeat again, the shepherd's rod is very plain. In tract number 5, 110 and 111, I would like to read again the statement. It is not measured, meaning investigated, because it represents those among whom there are no bed to be cast out. For they are gathered in after the cleansing of the heavenly temple. Daniel 8 verse 14. After the judgment of the dead. After the separation of the bad from among the good in the church, as illustrated by the parable of the net. Matthew 13 verse 47 and 48. They are those who by name my people. Revelation 18 verse 4 are called to come out of Babylon, and who with no unclean among them, Isaiah 52 verse 1, come into the already purified and living church of God. The question is that, who are they by which by name they are called my people? That is pointing to Amay. Here in tract number 4, page 12, it says, the same pair of children introduced in the first chapter of the vision are in the second chapter redenominated, the difference being that from both names is dropped the prefix lo, which in the Hebrew means no. Accordingly, whereas lo Ruhama means no mercy, and lo Amay not my people, Ruhama means mercy, and Amay my people. So who are they by which by name God calls them my people? Pointing, brothers and sisters, to ancient Israel. Now here in tract number 8, on page 12, it says, and it is concerning Hosea 1 verse 10. Hearing Christ's teachings, then rejecting them and crucifying him, the Jewish nation brought upon their heads the doom which God pronounced upon them, when through his prophet he declared, ye are not my people, and I will not be your God. Though at the same time, in his great mercy, he left the promise be written in the place where it was said unto them, ancient Israel. Who are they? Ancient Israel. Ye are not my people. There it shall be said unto them, ancient Israel, ye are the sons of the living God. And that is during the commencement of the loud cry to the great multitude, by which the very first constituent, the very first increment must be pointing to the 12 tribes, but by which they lost their racial identity. Now, I would like to read to TG number 6. 2TG number 6 on page 16. It says, we must not overlook the fact that the gospel of Christ divided the house of Judah into two sects, Jewish and Christians. That the Christian church for about 4 years after the resurrection of Christ considered practically only of Jews. Plainly then, the original Christians were full-blooded Jews. The Christian church is only a branch of the Jewish church, but they and their descendants have, through the years, lost the racial identity. Then too, the descendants of both Israel and Judah, who through the years of captivity lost their identity as did the Jews who embraced Christianity, according to prophecy, must also have greatly multiplied. Plainly then, many who are taken as Gentiles are but unidentified descendants of ancient Judah, Israel, and the Jewish Christians. The Christian church herself is, as we have seen, a Jewish Christian church. So who are they? The 12 tribes to be gathered into the purified church. It says, plainly then, many who are taken as Gentiles are but unidentified descendants of ancient Judah, Israel, and the Jewish Christians. Therefore, it could not be the literal Jews found in the Middle East, by which even at this present time, they do not acknowledge Jesus Christ as the Messiah. But according to the voice of inspiration, brothers and sisters, it must be the unidentified, by which we might call them at this present time as Gentiles. But in reality, they were the unidentified 12 tribes by which the racial identity were lost. And they were the very first one to be gathered during the Great Tribulation. So God perfectly arranged the plan of redemption, brothers and sisters. But the focal point of our study is that the chronological order of events. First, at the commencement of the message to the second fruits, the gathering of the second fruits, the proceedings that pertains to the dead is completely finished. That is very plain, according to the voice of inspiration in track number 5, 110. The cleansing of the sanctuary is completely finished, which is the blotting out of names, but not the proceedings in the most holy place. Now, the statement on the great controversy 485, saying, the work of the investigative judgment and the blotting out of sins is to be accomplished before the second advent of the Lord. Since the dead are to be judged out of the things written in the books, it is impossible that the sins of men should be blotted out until after the judgment at which their cases are to be investigated. both brothers and sisters, I would like to say that both apartment, there is an investigation. That is illogical and also no justice at all. If the names had been blotted out without any investigation, there must be close examination. There must be close investigation to determine whose names to be retained and whose names to be blotted out. The same in the most holy place. Before the sins of the righteous will be blotted out, there must be investigation first. Investigation always precedes execution. Because it is out of justice to execute without any investigation. Therefore, the statement in tract number 5, 110, thus the great multitude which no man could number will no longer be investigated, must be pointing only to the investigation in the holy place. Because the only investigation in the holy place is blotting out of names. And since at the time when the message goes to the great multitude, God will no longer allow that there are still wicked to be converted to the message. No more bad to join the church. Then absolutely, no more investigation. For what for? Such investigation, blotting out of names, if there is no more names to be blotted out. But all the constituent of the great multitude must pass the investigation in the most holy place in order for their sins to be blotted out. It is impossible that their sins will be blotted out without investigation first. Because God is a God of justice. Justice and mercy kiss each other, according to Psalms 85, verse 11. Now let us go back to our subject, brothers and sisters. We already established the absolute fact that at the commencement of the message, the loud cry proclamation to the constituent of the great multitude. First, according to 2 SR 173, there are still saints to die. The harvest mentioned there in 2 SR 173 is the harvest of the second fruits. Because accordingly, in 1 SR 219, the word from henceforth, meaning from the time when the company of the 144,000 was sealed. Or in other words, Revelation 14:13 will be fulfilled after the 144,000 living saints were sealed as a body. If they were already sealed as a body, then the sealing of the 144,000 was completely finished, and the harvest of the first fruit was completely finished. Therefore, that harvest on 2 SR 173 is intended to the second fruits. And since at that time, according to our reading, that the commencement of the message addressed to the second fruits, the great multitude, it is after the cleansing of the heavenly temple and after the judgment of the dead. The word after can be easily understood that when the message is proclaimed to the second fruits, the harvest of the second fruits, that is after, meaning when the cleansing of the sanctuary, the heavenly temple, the blotting out of names, of all the names of the wicked is finished, and the entire proceedings that pertains to the dead is already finished. But since at that time, there are still saints to die, and the quotation in 2 SR 173 and 1 SR 219, they are those who will die under Revelation 14:13, by which Isaiah 57:1 are those who died since 1844 prior to the evil time. Therefore, the evil time mentioned in Isaiah 57:1 is the period when Revelation 14:13 is fulfilled. And that is after the 144,000 were completely sealed. Therefore, the constituent by which they were judged in the heavenly sanctuary while living is pointing to Revelation 14:13. While living. Or in other words, before they died, their proceedings in the holy place and most holy place was already finished. Revelation 14:13 is the last constituent under the sixth seal, the altar, the last constituent of the saints that are destined for grave and resurrection. But at the time that they began to die, that is after the judgment of the dead, meaning their cases in the heavenly sanctuary were judged while they were still alive, before they died. All others, their proceedings had been considered in the heavenly sanctuary after they died. But Revelation 14:13, their cases in the heavenly sanctuary were already finished while they were still alive, and they were destined to die during the Great Tribulation, by which the Great Tribulation commenced after the judgment of the dead, meaning after their cases, Revelation 14:13 is finished. Now let me read to you 2 SR 162. So let us read 2 SR 162. It says, the cases of all who are sealed from 1929 to the final close of provision will be investigated before the throne in the heavenly sanctuary while living. Now, brothers and sisters, of course, the statement cannot be construed that all of them from 1929 up to this present time while living, because all of them were already dead. The statement is only pointing that the cases of all who are sealed from 1929 to the final close of provision will be investigated before the throne in the heavenly sanctuary while living can be easily understood. First, that the final close of provision mentioned here is pointing, brothers and sisters, to the church. That when the investigation, the cases of all from 1929 to the final close of provision, so those investigated while living, they are those who will be investigated in the period of the final close of provision. Now, I would like to illustrate 1929. So let us distinctly separate the cases from 1844 to 1929. They have separate cases. But the statement is the cases of all from 1929. Then let us put here, final close of provision. It is not the final close of provision throughout the whole world. The word final, that is pointing to the last part of provisionary time to the church, as we continue in 2SR 162. So, the cases from 1929 to the final close of provision is pointing to the last cases to be considered in the heavenly sanctuary, those that had been judged in the heavenly sanctuary while living. While living. Brothers and sisters, so from 1844, 1929 to the period of the proceedings by which the one which is considered in the heavenly sanctuary are those constituent under the sixth seal, which pertains to Revelation 14:13, those cases that had been investigated in the heavenly sanctuary while living. The word while meaning before they died. It cannot be applied to the living saints, because the living saints will no longer to taste that. While living. Now let us continue reading. 2SR page 162. So let us read again. 2SR page 162. The cases of all who are sealed from 1929 to the final close of provision will be investigated before the throne in the heavenly sanctuary while living. So the investigation is in the heavenly sanctuary. And they will be investigated in the heavenly sanctuary while they were still alive. Then it says, the investigation commences after the fulfillment of Ezekiel 9. Now, ponder deeply, brothers and sisters. It says, the investigation commences after the fulfillment of Ezekiel 9. And then it says, close of provision for the church. So, which will come first? It is the fulfillment of Ezekiel 9. Because the statement says, the investigation commences after the fulfillment of Ezekiel 9. It did not say before the fulfillment of Ezekiel 9. It did not say during the fulfillment of Ezekiel 9, but rather after the fulfillment of Ezekiel 9. So it is very important to have a clear conception concerning the fulfillment of Ezekiel 9. And then BTO says, close of provision for the church. And it says, our living saints. Now, brothers and sisters, we need to understand clearly that concerning the proceedings in the most holy place is divided into two sections. The first section is called the beginning work, and that is blotting out of sins. And the second section is called the closing work, which is granting of rewards. And pertaining to the book work, the granting of rewards is inscribing their names in the book of resurrection. And the other term used by the shepherd's rod is to give them right. I would like to read that statement in Tom Symbolic Code number 3, page 18 rather. 12 Symbolic Code number 3, page 18. The only judging which the sanctuary in heaven does in regard to this is to give the right for one class of the dead to arise either in the first resurrection or in the second resurrection. But we know there are three resurrections. Ezekiel 37, Daniel 12, and Revelation 20 verse 5 and 6. Therefore, there are three proceedings in giving right to arise in the resurrection. To arise in the first general resurrection, to arise in the special resurrection, Ezekiel 37, to arise in the special resurrection, Daniel chapter 12. So it is very important to understand completely the entire proceedings in the heavenly sanctuary. But as far as the Bible is thus concerned, as illustrated in the parable of Matthew 20, the first one that had been considered in the proceedings in the heavenly sanctuary is the last one to be resurrected. The first became the last, and the last became the first. So the proceedings must be, the last proceeding must be Revelation 14:13. They will be judged while living. And the proceeding prior to Revelation 14:13 is Isaiah 57:1. And we have Ezekiel 37. And we have the resurrection in Revelation 20 verse 5 and 6. And we know that Matthew 20 is 5 distinct calls, pointing to the proceedings in the heavenly sanctuary, that there are 5. And we know that first, the very first one to be granted immortality is the 144,000 living saints, spiritual Israel, right? That is the statement given in 2SR, page 235, saying, why were the first paid last and the last first? Answer, the paid God's servants receive is eternal life and is characterized by the penny. Therefore, those who are granted the assurance of a never-ending life first are those who were hired last, and according to the parable, it was the company called at the 11th hour. They are those who are marked or sealed by the man with the writer's inkhorn of Ezekiel 9, or as John calls him, the angel with the seal of God, and he sealed or marked 144,000. This glorious company is the first who are granted the assurance of never tasting death. 2SR 235. So it is very important. What does it mean by granting immortality? For sure, the 144,000 living saints will be granted immortality before any of the resurrected saints will be resurrected. Because when the saints are resurrected, that is their reward. Immortality is granted. But the parable says the 144,000 is the very first to be granted immortality. Therefore, the granting of rewards, one penny, never-ending life, immortality granted to the living saints, 144,000, prior to the time when the saints are resurrected. And that is the fulfillment of that predicted event, that after the expiration of the 5 symbolical months, the 144,000 living saints will be made invulnerable to death. Now let us go back again, brothers and sisters, to our reading. I would like to show to you again an illustration. So, for example, this is the commencement of the loud cry. According to SR 173, by which during this loud cry proclamation, there are still many saints to die. Who are they? Revelation 14:13. The loud cry proclamation is not directed to Revelation 14:13, but rather to the great multitude, to the first increment of the great multitude, to the 12 tribes, the type, according to the shepherd's rod, who by name God called them my people, and that is pointing to ancient Israel. But when the message is proclaimed to the first increment of the great multitude, the judgment of the dead is finished. And since the judgment of the dead is finished, but after the judgment of the dead, judgment of the dead is finished, after the judgment of the dead is finished, there are still saints to die, and that is Revelation 14:13. Then we can easily understood that the constituent of Revelation 14:13, their proceedings in the heavenly sanctuary were considered while they were still alive, while living. And after the judgment of the dead is finished, then the message goes to the great multitude, the first increment, then those saints by which their proceedings in the heavenly sanctuary, the last constituent under the sixth seal, had been finished. Then after their proceedings had been finished, then they will die in the Lord during the loud cry proclamation, during the great tribulation, and they were the martyrs. Because altar is divided into two classes of saints, natural death and martyrs. The same with the four beasts in Revelation 4. The four living creatures in Ezekiel 1 have a complementary significance according to track number 1, page 35. Therefore, the sixth seal, the altar, since 1844, is divided into two divisions. Those who died in natural death and those who will die martyrs. Those who died in natural death, they are those who died before the evil time. The evil time, that is the time of the great tribulation, by which Revelation 14:13, they will die martyrs. And that is the fulfillment of the vision of Sister White in Selected Messages, Book 3. So let us read. Selected Messages on Book 3, page 397 and page 398. It says, persecution in the battle before the last closing conflict. It says, the last closing conflict is the time of trouble. The two armies will stand distinct and separate. 3 SM 397 and 398. As a matter of fact, it is entitled, Meeting the Sunday Law Crisis. During the Great Tribulation, that is called National Sunday Law. But during the time of trouble, that is called Universal Sunday Law. So, National Sunday Law must be applied only within the jurisdiction of the United States of America. But Universal Sunday Law, that is throughout the whole world. And that is during the time of trouble. Now let us read 3 SM 397 and 398. Persecution in the battle before the last closing conflict. The two armies will stand distinct and separate. And this distinction will be so marked that many who shall be convinced of the truth will come on the side of God's commandment-keeping people. When this grand work is to take place in the battle, prior to the last closing conflict, many will be imprisoned. Many will flee for their lives from cities and towns, and many will be martyrs for Christ's sake in standing in defense of the truth. You will not be tempted above what you are able to bear. Jesus bore all this and far more. 3 SM 397 and 398. So, that is the fulfillment when that persecuting power will tread down the saints. In 2SR page 51, it says, I would like to read. And 2SR 151, it says here, the spirit of prophecy also states that the king of the north brought to view in Daniel 11 verse 45, and the two-horned beast of Revelation 13 is the same power, and that it shall bear this mystical number 666. What does it mean by word mystical? That is full of mystery. It is not easily discerned. That's what it means by the word mystical. And then it says, we quote, this power is the last that treads down the true church of God. The last that treads down the true church of God. Now, in track number 3, page 39, it says, the treading of the horse is the massacring of the Christians who would not worship according to the dictates of the horn power. So that is the fulfillment of the vision of Sister White. There are many, thousands upon thousands will be martyred for their faith. The last constituent under the sixth seal. And one of the reasons that God allowed them to be martyred for their faith because they could not be able to undergo the fiery ordeal of the time of trouble. And in order for them to be saved, God allowed them to die. Or in other words, if God permits them to be alive during the little time of trouble, they will lose salvation because they cannot withstand the fiery ordeal of the little time of trouble, and only the 144,000 living saints could be able to stand. And why is it that they could not be able to stand? It's so because they did not understood the complete plan of redemption. So, the greatest possibility that they will be deceived. And more particularly, to the time when the false prophet will wrought miracles and let fire come down from heaven. All the constituent under the sixth seal, those who are destined for grave and resurrection, they will be, brothers and sisters, laid down to sleep prior to the little time of trouble, to avoid them of being deceived. And only the 144,000 living saints can withstand such deception because they completely understood the plan of redemption, and there is no more possibility of being deceived. Now here in 2SR 217, I would like to read the statement here. 2SR 217, it says, And hoping that God would help us in this very important subject. They who are to be sealed at that time were seen by John as a great multitude with palms in their hands. See Revelation 7 verse 9. Hence the scroll has made a turn, and the sealing for those who shall be judged while living has begun. Now, I would like to read again. 2SR 217. Hence the scroll has made a turn. So the scroll made a turn, or in other words, unrolling of the scroll. And then it says, and the sealing for those who shall be judged while living has begun. When? When the scroll has made a turn. 2SR 217. And I would like to inform the brethren that the sealing of God's people in the heavenly sanctuary is in 3 divisions, or 3 sections, or 3 phases. First, the seal of Jesus Christ. Second, the seal of the Holy Ghost. Third, the seal of God the Father. So that we could understand. And the last seal is the seal of God the Father. The seal of Jesus and the seal of the Holy Spirit, brothers and sisters, is performed in the holy place. And that is the permit to enter into the final sealing in the most holy place. You still remember the statement in 2SR page 84. He says, the virgins were called to meet him, and thus by faith go in with him to appear before the Father, the great judge. The seal is the permit. It places their names in the Lamb's book of life, and thus it grants to them the right to appear before the Father in the judgment, not in person but in figure, thus having their sins blotted out. The seal, which is the permit to enter into the most holy place, is the seal of Jesus Christ and the seal of the Holy Spirit. So the last and the final seal is obtained in the most holy place, and that is the seal of God the Father. So John 14 verse 6 saying, I am the way, and no man cometh to the Father but by me, is applied in that proceedings in the heavenly sanctuary. No one can enter into the most holy place except they have the seal, because that seal is the permit. 2SR page 184. And that seal is the seal of Jesus Christ and the Holy Spirit. Here in 2SR 202, I would like to read. There is sufficient scriptural evidence that all the saved in all ages are sealed with the seal of God. For this reason, the 7 periods are called 7 seals, and the names of those who are sealed are written in the book. Consequently, the book is sealed with 7 seals. John 6 verse 27, that is the seal of God the Father. Ephesians 4 verse 30, Ephesians 1 verse 13. We know that that is the seal pertains to the Holy Ghost. 2 Timothy chapter 2 verse 19. 2 Corinthians 1:22. And also Revelation 9 verse 4. Revelation 9 verse 4. We know that that is pertaining to the seal of Jesus Christ. Now, let us go back again to the reading in 2SR 217. Right? It says that, hence the scroll has made a turn, and the sealing for those who shall be judged while living has begun. What sealing that began at the time when the scroll has made a turn? Or vice versa, the sealing of those who will be judged while living will begin at the time when the scroll has made a turn. Now, I would like to read track number 1 and then also answerer. Track number 1 on page 24. And it is concerning volume 5, page 690. So let us read the statement. These solemn words may it lay well to heart, and may none let the enemy beguile them with good words and fair speeches on this life and death matter. Fix in your mind the fact that Christ rising up from his mediatorial work cannot be after probation has closed. For note carefully, he is to rise up during the unfolding of truth. That is very plain. When does Jesus Christ rise up from his mediatorial work? In the heavenly sanctuary? During the unfolding of truth. Or during the time when the scroll has made a turn. The statement in 2SR page 217. Now, reading in answerer number 2, page 68, and the same quotation, volume 5, page 690, in track number 1, page 24. That is also volume 5, 690. It says, viewing the question in the light of both statements, we see that Christ leaves the sanctuary. So Jesus Christ leaves the heavenly sanctuary at a certain time in the unrolling of the scroll. When? In the unrolling of the scroll. Coming to the church, he finds her not spotless and ready to meet him, but deep in sin, yet self-complacently feeding upon the errors, faults, and mistakes of others. Answerer number 2, page 68. Now, it could not be the time of the deliverance. Otherwise, we'll be saying that at that time, the church is deep in sin. Brothers and sisters, at that time, the church is still deep in sin. And would you think God would deliver them? If that is the condition of the church during the midnight deliverance? No, it could not be. This visitation of Jesus Christ is Christ's visitation, stated in tract number 3. Let me read to you. In page 46, it says, in graphic demonstration that He will come to earth with all His angels to execute judgment upon the living, the Lord revealed Himself prophetically to Ezekiel as being brought enthroned to earth by 4 living creatures just before the slaughter of the hypocrites in the church takes place. Just before the slaughter of the hypocrites in the church takes place. And the hypocrites there mentioned must be those people who are continually feeding the errors of others people, meaning they were speaking evil against other people, ruining the reputation of other people. And when Jesus Christ visits the earth, that is just before these hypocrites will be destroyed, according to tract number 3, page 46. Now, I would like to read to you the supplement, tract number 3. Tract number 3, the supplement. It says here, on page 75, or page 76, Spirit of Prophecy in Perfect Harmony. Now, to prove that Sister White's writings are in perfect harmony, while the testimonies of the prophets, with the testimonies of the prophets, we quote from the Great Controversy, page 425, showing that the purification of the church took place while the investigative judgment of the dead was going on, and just before the commencement of the loud cry of the third angel's message, the harvest, while the investigative judgment is going forward in heaven, while the sins of penitent believers are being removed from the sanctuary, there is to be a special work of purification, of putting away of sin among God's people upon earth. Then the church, which our Lord at His coming is to receive to Himself, will be a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing. Then she will look forth as the morning, fair as the moon, clear as the sun, and terrible as an army with banners. She is to go forth into all the world, conquering and to conquer. Prophets and Kings 725. Now, I would like to make a very simple illustration, brothers and sisters. First, so let us make a division here. So, heavenly sanctuary. And here is earthly sanctuary. Now, according to the Jarbas Rod in 2SR 162, the constituent of Revelation 14:13, they will be judged while living. So let us put here, while living. When would be their judgment takes place while living? 2 SR 162. After the fulfillment of Ezekiel 9. So that is very plain. After the fulfillment of Ezekiel 9. Now, brothers and sisters, since the judgment mentioned is judgment of the dead, so the proceedings must be in the most holy place. Most holy place. Now the statement, after the fulfillment of Ezekiel 9. What is the fulfillment of Ezekiel 9? I would like to read the statement in 2SR 216. 2SR page 216. It says here, Israel after the flesh, going into Egypt, then out of Egypt to Mount Sinai, the Passover in Egypt, and on the night when the death angels smote the firstborn of man and beast, and the departure of Israel are types of the church at the present time. The church going out of Egypt, worldliness, the purification of the church, the separation of the tares from the wheat, the fulfillment of Ezekiel 9. What is the fulfillment of Ezekiel 9? The separation of the tares from the wheat. Now, that proceedings is called cleansing of the sanctuary. And we read several times in tract number 3, page 53, it says, this startling revelation shows conclusively that the cleansing according to Daniel 8:14 is first of the sanctuary in heaven and second the sanctuary on earth. Now, to make it more clearer, therefore, the fulfillment of Ezekiel 9 in the heavenly sanctuary is the blotting out of names, brothers and sisters, blotting out of names, blotting out of names of the wicked, names of the wicked under the congregation of the living. It is called the fulfillment of Ezekiel 9. Now, it is easy to understand, brothers and sisters, that after the blotting out of names of all the wicked among the congregation of the living, then after that, the blotting out of names of all the wicked under the congregation of the living in the heavenly sanctuary, it is called the fulfillment of Ezekiel 9. What is the fulfillment of Ezekiel 9? 2SR 216. The tares are separated from among the wheat. The separation of the tares from among the wheat. 2SR 216. Or in other words, what is the fulfillment of Ezekiel 9 in the heavenly sanctuary? The blotting out of the names of the wicked represented by the tares. Therefore, after that event, then the proceedings in the most holy place concerning Revelation 14:13 while living commence. First, what proceeding? Blotting out of sins. Blotting out of sins. But in the earthly sanctuary, or brothers and sisters, in track number 3, 1934 edition, page 76, it says that during the sealing of the 144,000, during the sealing of the 144,000, the proceedings in the heavenly sanctuary is the closing work of the judgment of the dead, meaning the second section, because the blotting out of sins is the beginning work and the closing work is granting of rewards. That is the last part of proceedings of the sixth seal, represented by Revelation 14:13. Their names had been inscribed in the book of resurrection while they were still alive. They had been judged while living. Therefore, Revelation 14:13, from the holy place, their names had been retained in the Lamb's book of life while they were still alive. Their sins had been blotted out in the heavenly sanctuary while they were still alive. Their names had been inscribed in the book of resurrection while they were still alive. And all these proceedings will be completely finished after the 144,000 are completely sealed. And after the 144,000 are completely sealed, then commence the harvest to the great multitude, by which Revelation 14:13, it says, from henceforth, meaning after the 144,000 had been sealed as a body, then Revelation 14:13 commenced to be fulfilled, that they began to die during the great tribulation. They will be martyred for their faith, by which during the great tribulation, the message is addressed to the living saints, the first increment, the first constituent, the saints that will no longer to taste the second fruits, the type, the 12 tribes, according to the voice of inspiration. So, brothers and sisters, we will continue this subject, and I would like to say the least that the statement current events that may fulfill prophecy, brothers and sisters, if the events is pertaining to the occurrence on the earth, then that is the material side, by which such event is only a signal that the proceedings in the heavenly sanctuary is already finished. And we should not wait that event, because at that time, if that is the time that we will believe the message and accept the message, that is already too late, brothers and sisters. So we will continue this subject, and hoping that the good Lord will bless us and will help us. Thank you very much for listening and viewing this program. Have a beautiful and wonderful evening.